Hello and welcome to What the Tech from Boast AI, where we talk with some of the brilliant minds behind new and exciting tech initiatives to learn what it takes to tackle technological uncertainty and eventually change the world. Today's podcast is a very, very special episode of What the Tech, as I'm positively stoked to feature Boast's very own co-founder and community builder extraordinaire, Lloyed Lobo, onto the show. So, along with being one of the original brains behind Boast, Lloyd is also the founder of Traction, a community empowering over 100,000 innovators through connections, content, and capital. The community-led business model Lloyd spearheaded both here and at Traction was key to bootstrapping Boast in our early days. Lloyd tells his story as well as other community-first founder strategies in his new book, From Grassroots To Greatness, 13 Rules to Build Iconic Brands with Community-Led Growth, which features tactical advice from businesses both big and small, including Apple, Harley Davidson, Nike, Crossfit, HubSpot, and many, many more. It's a must read. And of course, any podcast featuring Lloyd is a must listen. I can't wait to hear from him directly about what it was like building Boast in tandem with the massive Traction community, his process for writing his first book, and his advice for founders navigating the startup scene in 2023. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Lloyd. How's it going, man?
The pressure is on, my man. I am super pumped. You put the pressure on. That's quite the intro.
Oh, yeah, dude. No, I mean, you've done it. You've seen it. We've seen it. You built this community for us. It's long overdue to have you on this show, honestly, Lloyd. I'm super excited to be here. I think it's a safe bet that many folks in our audience today probably know a little bit about your background, since, again, you're part of the DNA here at Boast. But I'd love to hear from you first off. Where are you based? What's your background? What are your passions? And how did you get into building these communities in the first place?
So currently I'm based in Dubai. So after I left the day-to-day at Boast last August, after the last Traction Conf we did, disconnected, moved to Dubai with the family, just wanted to experience a different part of the world where people choose to live and work a little different. Now, my journey actually ties to the Middle East in many ways. I was born in Kuwait, refugee of the Gulf War, and that was my first experience with entrepreneurship and community building in many ways. So what is entrepreneurship? Entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily mean building and scaling a company. We talk about the entrepreneurial spirit. What that means to me is taking an obscure idea and turning it into execution and impact while dealing with extreme uncertainty and risk. And there was no worse uncertainty and risk than being a refugee of the Gulf War. So one morning in fourth grade, one summer morning, my mom wakes me up and says, "Hey, you can't go to school anymore. A war has been hit." Now, my first reaction was excitement because I was pretty sure I'd failed fourth grade because right before the holidays, I have this maybe reading disability or whatever you want to call it. I'd procrastinate on anything reading, writing. So I ended up studying for a math exam, show up, it's a geography exam. So when my mom wakes me up that morning, I said, "Yes, you're never going to find out that I failed fourth grade." That was my first reaction. But when things started to sink in, I saw this worry on their face and stress. And I'm like, okay, things are getting real. And I don't know what it is, but let's find out. So that day I go down the building with my dad. And in 2023, bad news perpetuates, we belabor negativity. But back then, as soon as we saw other people, rather than thinking about what worse is going to happen, they started saying, "You know what? We don't have security. There's no phones. There's no activity. How do we help each other?" And somebody came up with, "Hey, I'll guard the building from 6 to 12." And somebody else said, "I'll guard the building to 6. Another person said, "I'll organize food supplies." Somebody said, "Hey, we have family members that have been displaced." And others were like, "Hey, we have extra room." Every building became a sub-community, and word of mouth from building to building to building spread. Literally, we were walking from building to talk to each other. And it turned into one of the largest grassroots evacuation movements that took the people to safety. They communicated with embassies, with governments, and organized buses for us to go from Kuwait to Baghdad to Jordan, lived in refugee camps, and then eventually make our way out of there. That was a time when the security in the country had fully lapsed. It was chaos. There were bombings, there were lootings. It was insanity. But that day I understood two very important things. One is the power of people in coming together towards a cause or a purpose that transcends individual gain. And then the second thing was this dealing with risk and uncertainty to take an idea to execution. And that drove me throughout my career. And a few years later, we ended up moving to Canada, my family and I got into engineering school. And that's where I met Alex. Alex Alex and I were great friends and partners in every project through software engineering program in university. I would be the front person. He'd build all the back end. We had a great relationship. When we graduated, Alex got into Johnson & Johnson's engineering leadership program. They picked like 2 per country. And I went into working at small company startups. The first job I actually ended up taking was in cold calling at a tech company. And my Indian parents lost it. They're like, man, you went to school to study software engineering and you're cold calling at this company. It's so embarrassing. Our friends' kids are at Microsoft and everything else. And what had happened was, I had this affinity towards risk and uncertainty. And I had asked a business person in the family, what's the best skill I could learn if I wanted to be an entrepreneur someday? And he said, sales. Sales is everything. Sales fixes everything. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he said, from convincing your family that, you're not going to bring money, to convincing early customers, to convincing your employees and evangelizing them, to investors, to talking to the press, everything you do is going to be selling. It's communication. And he said to me, if you suck at this skill, communicating, the only way to learn it is to put yourself in a situation that requires you to do it over and over and over again. See, now these days we talk to a lot of people who say, I suck at writing, or I would love to build my LinkedIn profile, but they never post. They post once a week, once a month, almost never post. If you suck at something and you never do it, then you'll never get good at it, right? Jason Lemkin wrote the foreword on my book, and his key quote was, consistency is the secret ingredient that turns small actions into big outcomes. And what that means is when Jason Lemkin left his company, EchoSign, after he sold it, he started writing very consistently for Quora, almost like 2-3 posts a day. He would seed the questions, and he wrote that for a couple years, and then eventually moved that content to blog and LinkedIn. He still consistently writes 2 to 3 posts a day. The compound interest on consistency over time is what we call overnight success. And so I said, I'm going to find a job then in sales. I started applying to only sales jobs. I don't think I applied to even a single engineering job. And obviously nobody wants an awkward engineer as an AE in their company. So I begged my way into getting a job in cold calling at a small company. I applied for a customer service job or a technical support job, and I finagled into cold calling. And I still remember, man, the first cold call I made, I practiced for 4 hours. And finally, when the DM, the decision maker, came on the line, I hung up and everyone around me was laughing.
My God, Lloyd, I can fully relate to that, especially the point about consistency. So a little bit about me. I went to school for journalism. I had crazy social anxiety when I started that. I really liked writing. Interviewing people, not my strong suit. I went and became a bartender. I went and started waiting tables. I basically forced myself to talk to people day to day as much as I could. Years later, here I am hosting a podcast and I have you on the line, and it's fantastic. But I can definitely attest to that. Consistency is key, and that's how you build up that skill set. And even going back to sales being everything. On the marketing side, a lot of people don't like hearing that what you're ultimately doing at the end of the day is sales. It's all one big umbrella, but what you're doing on the marketing side is communicating for sales, what the value is, and getting that out the gate. I love hearing that that's at the root of everything. I also loved hearing you talk about Jason and how he got into blogging every day. I'd love to bridge that into how you got into writing this book. I know you had said that writing might not have been your strong suit. How did you get into the process of actually pulling together these stories and creating this new resource for founders?
It was the hardest thing ever, right? I don't think I can actually outline a single book that I read cover to cover. The few that I read were actually audiobooks that I would listen on CD-ROMs back in the day when I was in the sales career, driving from location to location. So I've listened to a number of audiobooks, but I've never read a book cover to cover. So it was actually very hard for me to collate the information and read it. So after I left the day-to-day at Boast, I ended up feeling quite lost. It was the first time in my life that I had felt like I was losing my community, because my childhoods were spent in the slums of Mumbai where my grandparents were and my mom grew up. And despite having a small little home that would be a bathroom in today's sense for most people, I'd have the most wonderful times of my childhood there. There was no restroom in the house, so you had to go to a public washroom. Puddles everywhere turned into ponds, and we would be swimming in the ponds. Not every home had a TV, and so watching TV was a communal thing. And every summer when I'd go to Kuwait, I'd cry and I'd not want to leave. And then the Gulf War happened, and that became my community. When I went into sales, everything I wanted to learn in sales came from HubSpot's community, because I started Google searching and all the content I would find was from HubSpot's inbound marketing certification. I still remember Gary Vaynerchuk, another example of consistency. He had a video on HubSpot's inbound marketing program on video content creation. And this is what, 2005, 6, Gary Vay was a chubby young guy talking about creating video, how it's going to explode the future. And that bet's played out for him, right? Really well. And he was running Wine TV. And so HubSpot inbound marketing became my community. Then when we started Boast, the first thing we did was dive into what you have experience with. It was cold calling, picking the phone, dialing for dollars. And we tried calling like big companies and small, and nobody would really talk to us. Imagine we're saying, give us your data and we'll get you money from the government for your R&D. Not a lot of people would talk to us. Then we said, okay, you know what? Let's start going to all these events. We started going to manufacturing events and construction tech events. Every industry that we serve that does product development, we went to their events, and we couldn't resonate. We couldn't fit in with the tribe. And then we started going to the startup events in the community. We had started the company out of Calgary. So I was in San Francisco. Alex was in Calgary. So I temporarily relocated. And so we started going to the Calgary community events, and we felt, hey, this is our tribe. We're founders ourselves. We don't come from success, right? And we can resonate. We can talk to each other. And as we started going to these events, we realized everything that was being talked about by the speakers were high-level CEO platitudes. And that's not helpful to a founder at 0 or 1 trying to get to 1 or 5. And I think the reason that was because everyone organizing those events wasn't a founder. They were event organizers. And we said, there's an opportunity here. We know other people from startups that we've been at, and, function of me being in Silicon Valley, why don't we start hosting events? So our messaging quickly evolved from buy my stuff, buy my shred, buy my R&D tags, to, hey, founder, we're bringing CEO of a company at 5 million to talk about X topic, which was typically like how to get your first customers, how to test your first marketing channels, how to get your first angel investment, how to motivate your team, hire your first people when you don't have money, those kinds of things, 0 to 1, 1 to 5 things. And we got only 10 spots, and there's going to be pizza. Would love for you to make it. And we'd hosted that Assembly co-working space in Calgary. And the first meetup, 10 people showed up, and more people started showing up. And that was great until one fine day, we did a launch with Plug and Play in Silicon Valley. Plug and Play is a big incubator accelerator. And we had some talks and some pitches, and 200 people showed up. We had hijacked all the aisles in the co-working space. And then the folks running the co-working space says, guys, you can't do this anymore. This is now like not a pizza night or a meetup. It's a full-blown conference. But you see, what led up to that was also consistency, doing these meetups very, very consistently. The other thing we did unknowingly was, today LinkedIn is huge. Podcasts are huge. YouTube is huge. Back in 2012, when we started, these channels weren't significant. Nobody was podcasting. Everyone was just blogging, and nobody was posting deep content on LinkedIn. And we said, if we build a blog ourselves, it's going to take ages to get the SEO juice. So I started hitting up the local newspaper, Calgary Herald, Post Media. And I'm like, listen, can you give me a column? I'll write Startup of the Week. I came up with the idea of Startup of the Week 2012. And I said, I'll write every week. I promise you don't have to pay me. And did my best to convince them. First wrote for some mid-tier blogs. Then I graduated and end up writing a couple of blogs for, I think it was Tech Vibes, which was acquired since, and Beta Kit maybe. And then I shared with them, and I'm like, hey, these are being shared all over. And then they gave me a column, and I kid you not, man, 2012 to maybe 2014, 15, I wrote Startup of the Week for 2.5 years. So the social proof, now think about it, right? This is in a community where startups weren't being given any love. No service provider wanted to service them. In fact, when Alex and I started the company, service providers or competitors would make fun of us. Like, oh, why are you going after the startup market? You guys are going to go bankrupt in 6 months. And we're like, you don't want to service them. We can't get to the clients you service. So it's like, we found our tribe. We're helping our tribe, right? And I think the only way to win big is to have a contrarian view on the market and be right. We said the startup market is going to grow exponentially, and it's going to leave behind manufacturing and other industries. And that's exactly what happened. Now, fast forward, these accounting firms, law firms, they all want to run startup support programs. Hey, where were you in 2012? You weren't doing these things, right? It was driven by adding value to our tribe. That's how that community started. And the 2 channels we leveraged was in-person meetups that today has evolved into traction, and the online content that we put on a third-party newspaper website, Startup of the Week. The beauty of doing that was we got a lot of link juice.
Yeah.
And like I said, if we started the startup of the week on our blog, no one would read it and it would take years to build the SEO. So we said, if we put it on Calgary Herald, one will get the link juice from online. They promised to put it on print because the first one I wrote online got shared so much. Because think about what's happening now. As soon as a startup is featured in a paper, what are they going to do? Share with all their friends. They're going to run to the aisles. The first thing it's going to be released every Monday. And they're going to pick a copy. They're going to tweet it, take photos, send it to people. It's a matter of pride, right? And so they shared it with everyone. And the shareability let Calgary Herald put it in the newspaper, in the print, given the first couple were shared so much. And so we did that for 2.5, 3 years. And then, of course, got busy with Boast. Things got, harder and the company scaled and I stopped writing that column. So some key lessons over there, taking a pause, I'm going through the long journey of why I wrote the book, but some key lessons there for community builders or entrepreneurs wanting to build a community is, if you want to build a community, step one is figure out if you have the DNA of giving. If you don't want to give people and you want to monetize on day one, you're better off trying direct response channels like sales, email, ads, whatever there is, right? If you want instant gratification, community is a labor of love. It's a marathon of the heart and mind, and it takes a long time to build. You don't see results on day one. It's literally this pattern: visibility, credibility, and then profitability. You show up everywhere, which is what you're doing now, Paul. You show up everywhere. You rub shoulders with the right influencers. So you get their brand rub, and by association, you become credible. By virtue of providing value, you become credible. And then you drum up the noise and become profitable. So it takes a long time. But if you have the DNA of giving and you want to go on this journey, the step one is figuring out your values. Boast, when we first started, we were reaching out saying, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. When we landed on the ICP, we're like, this is our tribe. How do you land on your ICP? 3 things. One is, what is the size of the market and is it growing? 2 is, what is their propensity to pay? And 3, what is the ease of access? Like, draw 3 columns and score it. Now, if you're in a massive market that's growing and they have a great propensity to pay, but if you have no ease of access, you're never going to get any customers. Now, the next phase is you want to build a community. Say you pick a channel. You looked at a bunch of different channels and you said, community is one I want to do. So if you want to do community, you got to figure out, do I have the values of a community? What are the values of a community? I write about this in the book. I come up with a 6-step framework called CAMPER: connection, autonomy, mastery, purpose, energy, recognition. And, sounds cheesy, but if you implement CAMPER in your company, in your community, you will have happy campers. And what that means is people crave connection. Nobody wants to be micromanaged. They want autonomy. If you try to control them, you'll kill your community. Everyone wants to get better and better at what they do. Community transcends your profits, right? People are giving their time. They're volunteering in many cases. They're coming together for value. If they're coming just to fill your coffers, they're going to wither away. That won't last. And so the purpose is really important, a purpose that transcends your product or your service or your profits. Energy is key. Who knows that better than you? Look at the energy. You started with such great energy that yanked out the energy out of me. Look at any leader, any movement, any community. Energy is key. And the last one is recognition. No matter how big or small the help is, if you don't proactively recognize people, they're going to feel like robots and not want to show up. The other thing is figuring out your purpose, which is your forever. What is my purpose that lasts beyond me or the company? What is the vision? Meaning, what will the world look like as a function of my existence? And then the third one is the values. The values I talked about, the CAMPER values. I wanted to start with the values because values are how you behave, how you show up. So the purpose went from automating tax credits or getting people money for tax credits to helping innovators change the world. Why did that happen? It's because we figured out our tribe and we understood their aspirations and their goals. Why do founders and innovators want any funding, let alone R&D funding, to grow their business? Why do they want to grow their business? Why do they want to invest in R&D? To create impact for themselves, for the world. Our purpose became enabling innovators to change the world. Every dollar spent in innovation returns 20 to the economy. Vaccines, robots, clean drinking water is a function of innovation. And so that became our why, is helping innovators change the world, because if you don't do that, the world won't exist. Then what was the vision? Accelerating innovation. As a function of our existence, what will happen is innovation will be accelerated in the world. So then what was the mission then? How do you do it? Through funding? See, now think about it, right? Like there's this graphic that shows Mario, he eats the mushroom and he becomes Super Mario. They say the mushroom is not your product. Your product is Super Mario. Customers want an outcome. They don't want technology. They don't want software. Your job is to get them that outcome by any means possible. But if you want to build something enduring, you got to help them get that outcome. You got to understand their aspiration. And so how did we do it? Not just through funding, but through know-how. And that's why we started building this community saying, yes, we do a great job getting our companies R&D tax credits, but if they don't have the know-how, they'll never succeed. They'll never know how to spend this money. And so we started creating and building all this content to help them become successful, which eventually evolved into the Traction community.
Yeah, I love so many points you brought up in there that I think have really laid the groundwork for all the success we're experiencing today at Boast. The DNA of giving. Every time I talk to a founder, they're happy to see us. That is so rare when you're in a marketing position and you're going up to people at shows and being like, hey, you're one of our customers. Can I get a quick testimonial? They already know who I am when we're coming because they know Boast. They recognize our brand and they understand that we've saddled up with them. We have worked closely with them for more than just that funding mechanism. Like you said, we're helping share that know-how. They recognize Traction and they tie it to Boast too, but also just our teams, even our CD and CS teams, they partner up. They are founders in their own rights, many of them. We have Aaliyah on the show often. She'll usually bring in a founder friendly who is a customer of ours, but also somebody who she's worked with on helping build a community and helping build an actual startup. So we practice what we preach. It makes my job easy when we're carpet bomb the shows and I'm trying to get some people to talk to me because they're happy to. They really love the work that we've done. They love the community that you've built up and they want to be a testimonial for us. They want to be in our network because we get stuff done and we do good things. It's exciting. And I cannot wait to actually get my hands on this book and to read through the whole camper philosophy and to see some of these graphics that you've actually mentioned here. Now, going closer to the book, in writing it, without giving away any spoilers, because I do want people to buy a copy and not get it all here, but what would you say was, if not your biggest surprise, maybe biggest lesson?
I love what you shared, that the community philosophy, right? The one thing I want to share, we called it Traction and not the Boast community for a very specific reason. There's three types of communities you can build. There's a community of practice, which is bringing people together to learn about a specific skill or a craft that transcends your product or service. There's a community of product where people come together to learn about the product and become evangelists. And then there's the last one is a community of play where people come together to have fun, like a Harley Davidson community or Nike community. A community of product, maybe the Microsoft community or the Atlassian community. And a community of practice is like that HubSpot community where I learned everything about sales and marketing, is the Traction community. And we called it Traction because that's the term that is everlasting, right? What do entrepreneurs, what do innovators want? They want traction. We couldn't have called it the Boast community because if we called it the Boast community, people would think they would be sold to. And here's a key learning. If you're starting out and you don't have customers or you have very few customers and you don't have product market fit, build a community of practice that transcends your product or service, and you'll build that social proof. Because through that, what will happen is you'll build partnerships with key influencers, with key partners, and with press and journalists and everyone. You basically draw up the circle of influence around your ideal customers, and you'll partner with them to deliver value to them. So that's what we did. So then fast forward many, many years, we end up selling majority to Radiant Capital in 2020 during the pandemic when the community had opened up for in-person conferences. And the Radiant Capital folks who had come to the event, they called me and said, hey, I'd love for you to join our venture partner network. I said, hey, we have business to run. I don't think I can do that. And they started inquiring what the business was and their jaws dropped and they wanted to invest. And we ended up doing a deal where they bought about 50 some odd percent of the company. And through that, it was like a full circle, right? The community helped the social proof and everything. And the community also brought us the funding. And, no better way for me to think that the entire journey from that spending my childhood in the slums to the Gulf War, to the HubSpot community, to the Traction community, and just the community around Boast was part of my DNA. And so when I left the day-to-day at Boast, I felt lost. I felt I'd lost my tribe and everything. And so as a way to pay homage to the community, I started writing the book when I had all this free time. And in that process, I started rewatching all the Traction content. I talked to so many people, like the count is about 1,000 or a little over the past couple of years. And I looked into the guts of every iconic brand that exists. And I found a 4-step common path that is the same journey for every obscure idea that became legendary or a worldwide phenomenon, from Christianity to CrossFit. People listen to you, you have an audience. You bring those people together to connect with one another, you have a community. When the community comes together to create impact that transcends your product or service or your profit, it becomes a movement. And then when that movement has unwavering faith in its beliefs through rituals, it becomes a religion or a cult. As I talk to more and more people asking the same questions, the only way to come up with a framework is to keep asking the same questions and draw commonalities. I found 13 rules that were very common to all of them and how they went from obscure to iconic, and decided to turn them into stories. And the way I wrote this book was the only way I know that's digestible to me, because as I said, it was very hard for me to read or write. So I had to be able to consume it. So selfishly, I wrote it for me in many ways. If people don't like it, I apologize, but I wrote it me in many ways to get it out of the system. And the stories are intertwined. You start with unleashing camper and defining what camper is, then figuring out your why, then nailing your ICP. And it goes all the way to creating rituals and measuring and monetizing. And measuring and monetizing is the last chapter for that same reason that community is all about give, give, give. This is my gift to the community in many ways. I'm here because of the community. We said we'll take a sabbatical for a year and not do Traction conference this year. And so not being at Boast day to day and not hosting a Traction conference and being in a place like Dubai where everything is done for you in many ways, like it's a land of convenience, everything is done, delivered for you. I had a lot of time. I had never been in a situation where I had hours and hours of free time. So I said, this is the best use of my time, is to put a book together and pay homage to the community and share some of my journey, but journey of some of the greatest brands, enduring brands in the world, to show that technology will come and go, right? We're in this age of generative AI. People are spending less and less on marketing. The consumers are tired of spam, of seeing the same thing over and over, sharing personal data to access crappy white papers. And generative AI, after the initial buzz, has created the sea of sameness. I can actually tell instantly if somebody copy pasted something from ChatGPT. So how do you differentiate? If you see in a world increasingly influenced by artificial intelligence, the key here with this book is to reignite the conversation around the unique power of authentic human connections in molding enduring brands. Generative AI is the new wave, but technology and technological innovation has been there for generations. And when new technological innovation comes, always the old gets commoditized, right? Now we're talking about writers being commoditized and this and that, and generative AI is going to commoditize the world. But this also happened in the 80s when the Japanese manufacturers came in and commoditized electronics. Harley Davidson almost went bankrupt in the 80s. The management came out and said, we're going to rebuild the company on the ethos of community. Community wasn't a marketing strategy. Community became a company strategy. The leaders were required to go out in the community, start writer clubs, and bring people together and do bike rides and rallies. That's what they were required to do. Employees became writers. Writers became employees. Over time, they created a movement to save Harley. Not only that, they created movements to donate to breast cancer and autism, which transcended the Harley brand. Today, Harley is an iconic brand, right? You can see and recognize a Harley fan just by a function of what they're wearing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even to your point too, like there's so many charities that they get together. I live here in Boston and there's a lot of biker rallies up in New Hampshire. So to hear Harley was even struggling in the 80s and didn't have that community from the get-go, that's mind-blowing. I didn't realize that. It's just such an identity now. And you don't even think about Harley Davidson when you're thinking about those traditional tech conglomerates and the different kinds of communities that they're building compared to the Harley Davidson more fun and lifestyle brand. But it was kind of tech encroachment that pushed them to explore that new community, correct?
It was the tech encroachment, because you know what? Innovation will always come. Yeah. And if you think about it, yesterday's innovation is always today's option and tomorrow's commodity. See the GPS, right? You couldn't get your hands on it. Then it became an option. Today, there's CarPlay. Cars are even not having inbuilt GPS. They're like, why build it and keep upgrading the firmware and the software? We'll just use CarPlay. So what does that tell you? Yesterday's innovation is always tomorrow's commodity. But if you build a community, you will never become a commodity. And that is the profound learning here with every iconic brand that almost went bankrupt, like a Harley Davidson, or could have lost its way. Why do you think Apple exists? Apple's competitors don't, talk about the aspiration. Their competitors are always bashing Apple. But what has Apple done historically? They talk about the aspiration, helping people become better creators, the goals, things that transcend their product or service. You look at Nike. Nike has running clubs all over the world. And I've explored brands, both B2B and B2C, to give a flavor, because what we do in B2B is we make this one fundamental mistake. We think B2B marketing is different than B2C marketing. What we don't realize, especially it's true in 2023, that people do business with people. Technology aside, people do business with people. Let me ask you this. In your personal life, when you're scrolling, doom scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or whatever channel, do you follow and consume content from people or from brands?
People, of course, every time. Even if they're associated with a brand, I can tell when it's being fudged. So yes.
So that tells you right there, people buy from people. The other big trend, right, is this generative AI creating a sea of sameness. By 2024, Google is going to phase out third-party cookies. So owning your audience is going to be very key. The platforms and short content has created a boom and an explosion of influencers, and actually micro-influencers. The 100,000 follower category is the fastest growing. And what that tells you is we need to encourage our employees in our companies to become micro-influencers and create their own communities, create their own audiences, and enable them to bring their audience and communities together. This is what Harley did. Look at HubSpot. HubSpot has an infinite number of influencers from within the company from back in the day when they started. Because the thing is, when you try to control top down that influence, it breaks because you can't police everything, right? You need to have guidelines, not jail cells, right? Perfect example is Atlassian. Last year, Atlassian's community self-organized 5,000 events. Now, that took them 20 years of consistency to get to that. Imagine, so now that means you have 5,000 fans who are 5,000 micro-influencers who on their own power, without your support, can bring people together. And let's assume the average event was even 50 per people. So now you've congregated 25,000 by just providing some love and care and light support versus having an events team of like hundreds of people. 5,000 events self-organized. How does that happen, right? It's about giving your people the autonomy, identifying your super fans, showing them love, giving them the autonomy, giving them small budgets. Because if you don't enable your own micro-influencers, soon you'll be paying for others' influence.
Yeah, that is an amazing point, especially again, like you said, unique to 2023, but it's also lessons that we know from the past. You just got to nurture those communities. And I love the point you made too about there not being the distinction between B2B or B2C at the end of the day. Emphasizing again, it's about working with people. And I know you had said you started pulling together this book almost as a gift to your tribe and to the communities that you've built in the past. This truly is a gift, Lloyd. I'm excited to dive into it. I've already got my 99-cent copy. Do you want to let our listeners know where they can get their copy and when they can get a hard copy too?
Definitely. So the hard copy also you can buy. I'm going to put the paperbacks in the next week or so. It's just taken a long time. See, this is the function of somebody who's not traditionally written or read anything significant. So my first biggest challenge with writing, right, was writing for Startup of the Week in the Calgary Herald. I would always end up writing it an hour before the deadline, submission deadline, because it would stare me in the face. And I would take interviews and take down notes. Back in the day, there was no transcription or any of that. And so writing this book was hard. A lot of changes happened along the way. So we put the digital copy, it's on Amazon. We then put the hard copy as well. The hard copy is full color. There's beautiful images in there to mark each chapter. And then the paperback will also be full color. Go to From Grassroots To Greatness.com and that content will be there. And then we'll have a /bonus, because what I wanted to do is this book is written like a storybook in many ways. It's stories. It's conveyed through people's journeys and stories, because that was the only way I could read it. I couldn't read a very academic book, and so I couldn't write one. But I said every chapter will have an accompanying template coming up with your values, or who to target, or how to determine the right rituals. All of that, we'll put it in a Notion doc and we'll make it available for everyone who gets a copy of the book or not. We'll put it on From Grassroots To Greatness.com /bonus in the next couple of weeks after the book is launched, so you can start implementing it, whether you buy a copy or not.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And Lloyd, we'll have all of the links to everything in the blog post here and in our show notes. I know we're over time, but anything you want to throw in before we do a quick sign off?
Thank you to everyone for being a big part of my journey. And we are here today because of your love and your support. Literally, from two guys who were pounding the pavement, trying to make calls and have those early conversations, to today, Boast being a successful venture with 100 plus employees, funding and everything else. We couldn't have done it without the power of community. So truly, I'm thankful. And you, the community, has inspired me to write this book. What's really interesting is, like I said, as I was going through on that rickety bus from Kuwait to Baghdad to Jordan on the highway of death, when the bus was bombed, buses were being bombed, and it was just chaos. When I looked around the bus, the adults were laughing and smiling and singing, playing Bollywood music and everything. And I realized that day that it's neither the destination nor the journey, but the companions that matter the most. You could be on a crappy journey on the way to hell, and great companions make it memorable. And the other time I realized this is when after we did the Radiant deal and I got COVID, I almost died. I was in the hospital, and I realized, right, it's never the money in your bank. It's the people around your tombstone that matter. And the only time in my life where I was down was when I felt community was leaving me, when I left the day to day. And that was never the case. That was in my mind. And so I wanted to say is, wherever you go, build your community, and they'll fuel your energy forever, and they'll take you to new heights. Thank you so much for fueling mine. Lots of love.
Oh, that is beautiful words to end it on, Lloyd. I cannot thank you enough, and thank you so much for making this great company that I'm fortunate enough to continue building on. So I really appreciate it, Lloyd, and thank you again.
Thank you for driving the vision, my man.